Saint Apollonia, Virgin, Martyr, 249, Alexandria, Egypt. I had the saint's relic by me, and I saw the city in which she was martyred. It stands on a cape not far from the mouth of the Nile. It's a large and beautiful city. The house of Apollonia's parents stood on an elevated spot surrounded by courtyards and gardens. Apollonia was, at the time of her martyrdom, an aged widow, very tall. Her parents were pagans. But she had been converted in childhood by her nurse, a Christian in secret, and had married a pagan in obedience to her parents, with whom she lived at home. She had much to suffer. Married life was for her a rude penance. I have seen her lying on the ground, praying, weeping, her head covered with ashes. Her husband was very thin and pale, and he died long before her, leaving her childless. She survived him 30 years. Apollonia was extremely compassionate to the poor persecuted Christians. She was the hope and consolation of all in suffering. Her nurse also suffered martyrdom shortly before her in an insurrection, during which the dwellings of Christians were plundered and burned, and many of the occupants put to death. Later on, I saw Apolloniae herself arrested in her house by the judge's orders, led before the tribunal, and cast into prison. Again I saw her brought before the judge and horribly maltreated, on account of her severe and resolute answers. It was a heart-rending sight and I cried bitterly, although I had witnessed with less emotion even more cruel punishments. Perhaps it was her age and dignified bearing that touched me. They beat her with clubs, and struck her on the face and head with stones until her nose was broken. Blood flowed from her head, her cheeks and chin were all torn, and her teeth shattered in her gums. She wore the open white robe in which I have so often seen the martyrs, and under it a colored woolen tunic. The executioners placed her on a stone seat without a back, her hands chained behind her to the stone, her feet in fetters. Her veil was torn off, and her long hair hung around her face, which was quite disfigured and covered with blood. One executioner stood behind and violently forced back her head, whilst another opened wide her torn mouth and pressed into it a small block of lead. Then with great pincers he drew out the broken teeth one after the other, tearing away with each a piece of the jawbone. Apollonia almost fainted under this torture, but I saw angels, souls of other martyrs, and Jesus himself strengthening and consoling her. At her own request, the power was conferred upon her of relieving all pains of the teeth, head, or face. As she still continued to glorify Jesus and insult the idols, the judge ordered her to be thrown on the funeral pile. She could not walk alone, she was half dead. Consequently, 2 executioners had to support her under the arms to a high place where a fire burned in a pit. As she stood a moment before it, she appeared to pray for something. She could no longer hold up her head. The pagans thought she was about to deny Jesus, that she was wavering, and so they released their hold upon her. She sank on the ground as if dying, lay there a moment, and then suddenly arose praying, and leaped into the flames. During the whole time of her martyrdom, I saw crowds of the poor whom she had befriended wringing their hands, weeping, and lamenting. Apollonia could never have leaped into the fire by herself. Strength came to her with the inspiration from God. She was not consumed, but only scorched. When she was dead, the pagans withdrew, and the Christians, approaching stealthily, took the holy body and buried it in a vault. Amen.